From time to time, I enjoy playing video games that stretch our typical understandings of what the medium has to offer. These are the types of games that defy the idea that what makes for good gameplay is a repeatable loop with mechanics that you need to master to progress to new levels or to see the narrative play out to its conclusion. Some people turn to games like Harvest Moon and Animal Crossing, open-ended affairs that don't feature the same types of life and death consequences that you might experience in other mainstream titles. For me, I've always found that the systems in those games feel a bit too similar to the monotony of work to be enjoyable. I'm already stressed out enough about money. I don't need to also worry about the value of turnips when I play a video game. Instead, when I'm looking for a reprieve from titles whose gameplay mechanics are often designed to do little more than challenge, I look for smaller, narrative-based games where a single mistimed movement doesn't lead to catastrophe and having to frustratingly replay the last half an hour of gameplay. Enter Burly Men At Sea, a 2016 independent game described as a quiet adventure by the duo of Brooke Condolara and David Condolara at Brain&Brain. The promise of Burly Men At Sea is to translate the structure of folklorish adventure tales to the format of video games. Stories that are filled to the brim with customary lore that are told and retold and are transformed with each retelling, with aspects changed, exaggerated, or minimized based on the whims of the storyteller. You play as the game's titular Burly Men at Sea, who discover a mostly blank map stuffed inside of a bottle, and they go out on adventures to fill out the details of that map. Burly Men at Sea plays much like a point-and-click adventure title set somewhere in a pastel-colored Scandinavian world. The game mimics the folklore structure by presenting itself as a closed loop that encourages you to click away with the promise of starting again to make new choices and tell a new version of your story. Adventure games of yore made by Sierra and LucasArts could lead to monotonous affairs as you are forced to explore every nook and cranny for items that unlock the next part of the story. How then does Burly Men at Sea avoid being bogged down in monotony when repetition is built into the very structure of the game and its story? This is Burly Men at Sea for the PlayStation 4. At the outset of this review, it's worth saying that Burly Men at Sea is not a particularly time-demanding video game. You aren't likely to spend more than 30 minutes on your first playthrough. For that reason, this reflection is going to be light on narrative details apart from the basics, focusing instead on the structure of the game, its design and storytelling, and the way it controls in the version shown here for the PlayStation 4, which was first released in 2017. If you aren't the type to concern yourself with spoilers and you'd like to see how the game's story might play out on your first playthrough, we've uploaded a long play, if you can even call it a long play given how deliberately brief this game is, for the select extras. We've put a link to that video in the description box below, and we've included 2 more continuing adventures as a bonus if you're interested in seeing alternative paths. For the purposes of this review, suffice it to say that the game's story itself falls well within the genre of tall, seafaring tales. The story is at points positively expansive in scope, although it is told in a quaint and almost homespun fashion. Think of a classic epic, but maybe as told to the scale of a children's picture book. Your encounters with different sea things, other strange beings, or even the local barista walk a fascinating line where even the most grandiose of story beats are treated at once both sincerely and with a bit of a wry smile. The game sometimes manages to set up the expectation of an event as raising the specter of a conventional heroic adventure, but a twist or two, a joke or two, helps show that moment at a more human level, as was the particularly memorable case with an encounter between our bearded protagonists and a mountain. The game's branching story paths are fun and have great variety, and the story is told in an approachable way without coming across as overly simplistic. Where big box PC adventure games could devolve into clickathon experiences out of fear that you'd miss a clue that gated your progress through the story, Burly Men at Sea takes a more, shall we say, Bob Ross approach. There is no wrong way per se to play Burly Men at Sea. Every action you perform, and even those actions you perform by accident, contribute to the misadventure of the protagonists, opening up another branch of the game's story. The lean-back gameplay is complemented by an aesthetic style that is visually minimalistic, with subdued colors and simplified shapes. Burly Men at Sea was originally released for mobile devices, but it probably looks its best scaled to 4K on modern TV panels. I mentioned earlier that the game felt like an epic tale told in the non-threatening guise of a storybook, and I don't want to suggest that this connotes a game that's simplistic or necessarily for children, though I also don't see why this wouldn't be an appropriate game for children to play and indeed enjoy. Rather, it's that the game's design language adopts the efficiencies that are often the hallmark of storytelling in children's media. Characters and objects are formed of simple, two-dimensional compound shapes, or as in one particularly striking example, nothing more than a simple line drawing. The world is painted with flat coloration or simplified gradients. Characters and animals are given the most efficient animations possible to communicate movement, whether it be the simple horizontal flip when characters change directions, or the fact that chickens have their bodies rotate 90 degrees to make it look like they're pecking the ground. The game's visual aesthetic leans almost towards the realm of graphic design in its clean presentation. This might not appeal to everyone given the pervasiveness of this type of design, from logos to furniture, but to me the warm coloration and charming designs prevent the game from ever feeling either too clinical or derivative. The picture book quality of Burly Men at Sea is no doubt aided by the game's music and sound design, which makes liberal inclusion of sound effects and instrumentation obviously produced by the human voice, rather than by more conventional Foley methods, as though the game is being narrated by the storytellers themselves. These self-conscious implementations are at their height in the opening minutes of the game, and they include the sound of what I think is someone sucking air through a straw to replicate the sound of a rolling pin compressing dough, or the vocalization of the clinking sound made by a blacksmith's hammer. You don't control the trio of bearded brothers directly. Instead, in the version for PlayStation 4, you guide your adventurers in two principal ways. First, you can control the direction your characters travel by manipulating the world frame, using either both trigger buttons or the right thumbstick to do so. The burly men move as part of a trio, and your expansion of the frame shepherds them in one possible direction or the other. Strange as it may seem, I felt that expanding and contracting what part of the world was or was not visible gave me a really satisfying sense of control over the game's adventurers as you slowly alter the frame to see what places you can explore. More direct control can be achieved using the left thumbstick or the touchpad. You move a little cursor around the screen that enables you to speak to characters or interact with objects like the birds sat in the trees. While Burly Men at Sea may look its best on televisions, the gameplay comes out second best on home consoles when compared to the touch controls of the mobile experience. The gameplay is never really hindered by its control scheme, but on some occasions it's unclear what function the triggers perform, for instance, from scene to scene. A very mild spoiler ahead, but in one instance where the Burly Men's ship was caught in a tempest, I ended up performing the wrong action because the left and right triggers did not function quite in tandem in the way I intuitively expected, leading to my characters being sucked down to the depths of the ocean. There is no real challenge to the game, although some of the game's cleverer sections will require that you approach the control scheme from different perspectives to keep your characters from being left out at sea. As is typical for this game, the loop structure is such that any mistakes you might have made just means that you've explored another branching path in the game's story. Particularly after your first completion of the game, you're never really that far removed from looping back to the beginning and making new choices. The game does not have infinite possibilities, and many of the game's story beats are unavoidable, but it is an altogether fascinating affair to see how seemingly mundane choices lead to completely different results. Do you wear the barrels or not? Do you stay on the wild ride or do you abandon ship? Do you swim or do you sink? Perhaps then it would be more accurate to describe Burly Men at Sea as a choose-your-own adventure rather than a mere picture book. In the end, there's not much to Burly Men at Sea. It is a pretty game with a simple concept, a pleasing story, and it's all over almost as soon as it begins. Unlike so many games that tempt you to keep going with promises of new downloadable content, new costumes, hidden characters, more difficult missions, almost all of which seem to come at a paid premium, Burly Men at Sea makes no such demands on your time. It is not a roguelike that promises endless procedurally generated gameplay encounters, grinding out new weapons and abilities until you master the game. It is a game that does not overstay its welcome. It rewards you with nothing more than the sense of adventure. To put another storybook on the shelf, it won't take you much time to do so either. In some ways, Burly Men at Sea is not unlike many independently developed narrative-first games. If these games are your bread and butter, you may not find anything particularly exceptional about Burly Men at Sea. But for the rest of us, the game presents a welcome reminder of the fun of adventuring for adventuring's sake. Thanks for watching. If you like our approach to games coverage at The Select, in that we appreciate games in many different forms and at many different scales, we would appreciate your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. We create videos for The Select that are guided by our personal interests, and your support makes that possible.